Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I thought we would do something a little bit different from last time. I thought we'd have a bit of a rules and gameplay video. We've not done one of those in a while. It doesn't feel like I've done one in a while. So I thought we'd change it up a little bit and we'd have a look at whether it is worth taking the flank companies from our battalions and forming them into their own combined units. Now, not all nations had flank companies in their battalions. Most of them did. Some of them always attached them, some of them didn't. So the ones that didn't have flank companies are, well, the most noticeable one are probably the Prussians. Now, they did it slightly differently. They would have 3 battalions to a regiment, and the 3rd battalion would be fusiliers. So they would sort of be like the light companies of the regiment, rather than having it per battalion. The Russians, they didn't have light troops in their battalions, they only had grenadiers, and that's the same with the Austrians. Now, the Russian grenadiers, they would fight with their battalions, so a Russian regiment also had 3 battalions, but it only ever had 2 in the field. So the grenadiers of the 2nd battalion, the one that wasn't fighting, the one that was back in the depot, they would be brigaded with the grenadiers of the 2nd battalion of another regiment, and that would form a combined grenadier regiment. So there's rules for those in the Clash of Eagles book. They're not the ones that we're looking at today, because you would always take those. So we're not counting those. We're also not going to look at the Austrians as well. An Austrian battalion also had a big grenadier company. I think it was 1/3 of the battalion would have been grenadiers. But they would also be stripped out, and they would be in a converged grenadier reserve battalion as well. So as with the Ruskies and the Prussians, we're not going to talk about those today. So what does that leave us with? Well, realistically, it leaves us with... Oh, I should also say the Spanish, their 1st battalion, half of the battalion would be grenadiers, and they would fight or run away with the rest of the battalion. And we had a lot of hate from the Spanish lovers out there. So realistically, we are looking at the armies of 2 nations in this. We are looking at the armies of Great Britain and the armies of France and those that followed her organisation. So we're talking things like Bavaria or Württemberg, nations like that, basically. Now, in these armies, they would have the centre companies, as I say. The French would have 4 centre companies. The British would have 8, although the French ones were a lot bigger. And then they would have a grenadier company and a light company. If you were light infantry, for the French in particular, they would be called carabiniers for the grenadiers, and the light company would be called voltigeurs. But we're just going to go with grenadiers and light company for this one, because it applies to both the British and the French. Now, the grenadiers would be made up of the largest, toughest, strongest men in the battalion. The light company, usually the opposite. They will be the wiry, the most nimble men. That's where voltigeur comes from. It was, although not true, an apocryphal story, that a voltigeur should be able to vault onto the back of a horse with all his equipment on. And they were used as sharpshooters and the skirmish screen, whereas the grenadiers were often the shock assault troops of the battalion. Because we're concentrating on the British and the French, we're going to mostly be looking at the Albion Triumphant books. Volume 1 is obviously the one that's set in Spain, and this is where there was more use of combined elite company units. I may occasionally call them battalions, but obviously they weren't real battalions, in the same way that the 2nd Battalion, the 24th of Foot was a battalion or something like that. They were temporary only for that battle, or maybe even that part of the battle. And Volume 2, of course, deals with the 100 Days and the Waterloo Campaign. Now, in the 100 Days, interesting that the British cannot combine their grenadiers. They can only combine their light infantry companies. And that's fair enough. We see the light companies garrisoning various places, so that sounds reasonable to me. I don't think there were any converged grenadiers for the British at Waterloo, but I'm sure if there were, someone will let me know in the comments down below. Now, before we can really assess whether it is worth converging your grenadiers or your light companies into these extra units, we have to look how they are formed. And the way it works in the rules is this is done on a brigade level. If 2 of your battalions remove their light companies or their grenadier companies, then they may form a tiny unit of that flavour. So we'll go with grenadiers. If they're grenadiers, you can form a tiny unit of grenadiers. If 3 or 4 do it, then you can have a small one. If you have 5 or 6, then you can have a medium one. Presumably, if you have 7 or 8, you can have a large, although it doesn't specify that in the rules. So rules as written, you can't have a large unit of converged grenadiers, and that's probably fair enough, to be honest. And although I've used grenadiers in that example there, it's exactly the same with the light companies as well. Now, these units that you have made by stripping your flank companies from your normal battalions, if they are light infantry, then your main battalion, the battalion that they've come from, will lose their ability to form mixed order. So basically, they won't be able to throw out a skirmish screen in front of them, but the units that they create will be able to fully skirmish. So there is that. And if you remove the grenadiers, then you lose a point of hand-to-hand, but you will form the new unit, and they will have the Elite 5+ special rule. Now, quick shout out here for my idea, which was that battalions with grenadiers, so that includes the Russians and the Spanish as well, they should have Elite 6+ at all times to represent the steadiness of those grenadiers in the ranks. I also like the idea as well, because it means that if you do cop that 6, then you don't know for certain, and your opponent doesn't know for certain, that battalion is out of action for the next turn. But anyway, that's by the by. That's a subject for a different video, perhaps. A converged unit of grenadiers, though, will have the Elite 5+, which is the same as the Austrian and the Russian converged grenadiers get as well. Oh, I should also have said as well that in addition to the converged light companies being able to skirmish, because of that they also get sharpshooter as well. Now that's changed a little bit from version 1 to version 2, but they don't get the +1 to hit, but they still get the sharpshooter. Now that sounds great, we get these free units, that's awesome, what's not to love? Well, there is a downside to removing your elite companies from your main battalions. As I said, they don't currently give you Elite 6+, although I think they should, but instead they give you a hand-to-hand point. So if you remove your grenadiers from your line battalions, then you lose a point of hand-to-hand. As previously mentioned, if you remove the light companies, then you lose the ability to form mixed formation. There is a slightly stealthy bonus to this as well, and it could be worth even just going with a small unit. And that is because of the morale rules, or the brigade morale rules. Now, the rules as they currently are is if you are down to half your units, then your brigade is shaken, effectively broken, and they can take no real part in the rest of the battle. If you've got 4 battalions in your brigade, then that means the enemy has to destroy 2, and then the other 2 units can't do anything. If, however, you strip out your troops from your battalions and form a small unit, this doesn't work with tiny, you've got to be at least small, then that counts as a 5th unit in your brigade, so now the enemy has to destroy 3 battalions. Now, some people might say, well, that's a little bit gamey, but there is a historical or real life reason for this, and that is the troops are more likely to stand fighting if they know that there is an elite reserve, and I use elite in slightly inverted commas there, if they know there's an elite reserve backing them up. If they know that there's no backup whatsoever, then they're going to get a little bit antsy. So although on the surface you might say, oh Tim, that's you being gamey, to an extent it is, but I don't know why I did that funny voice. To an extent it is, but also there is a real life reason that could actually happen as well. So that's useful if you are playing a game that goes to a regular order of battle where you've got the 4 battalions, or it could even be that points game where you don't quite have enough points for that 5th battalion, so you have that small unit, and that'll enable you to have that the requirement that the opponent needs to destroy 3 units instead of 2 to break your brigade. So now we get to the crux of the matter. Is it worth it? Is it worth giving up a pip of hand-to-hand fighting value and or the ability to be mixed skirmish formation in order to have these elite troops? Now, I should say the mixed skirmish formation thing is that you count as being an obscured target, so you are at -1. And this is going to be a crucial part of whether I think it's worth it or not. And it is a little bit of a rules grey area. Now, when I play with my group, I assume that a French column, so we're talking specifically about the French here, that a French attack column can form mixed order formation. So it can be in column with its skirmish screen out front. Now, when we play with the boys up in Morpeth, you've seen our huge games of Catrabra and Linny. Then it is decreed there that nope, that's not doable. A column is a special formation in of itself, so you can only be in one special formation at a time. So you're either in mixed order or you're in column, which is, that's fair enough as well. So you can read it either way. Now, if you are playing it that you can only either be in mixed skirmish or column, then you are losing absolutely nothing by taking out your light companies, because you're going to be in column. I don't know how many times I've said this, but if you are a French player and you're not in column, then there needs to be a really good reason why you're not in column. Isn't that right, Clive? But if you are saying that, yes, you can be in an attack column and you can still put your skirmish screen out front, which to me seems to be the more historical way of doing it, but particularly in late war, I don't necessarily mind if people say, nope, that's not a thing, then you're probably better off keeping your skirmishes out in front. It means that your opponent doesn't get the... well, actually, no, they still get the +1 to hit because artillery ignores the skirmishes. But it's best off that way because it gives you the obscuring bonus, which, in addition to your improved morale save, makes your columns very survivable, and you need them to be in good shape for when they get in contact with the enemy. Now, for the British, is it worth them giving up their light companies? I come down more firmly on one side of the argument here, and I would say 100% no. And this is for two reasons. The first one is, you're the British, you've got first fire, and it comes down to the first fire rule, really. And it comes to two aspects of it. The first one, and probably the simplest one, is it gives you better shooting. If you are British and you are in a shooting war with the enemy, you are probably going to win. You want to stack the odds even more in your favour. You want to reinforce that success. And by making yourself -1 to hit, then you're making it really hard for that enemy to beat you in the musketry duel. The second thing with first fire as well is that the first time you shoot, as the name suggests, you get an extra dice. Now, if you have 3 shots, as most battalions do, and you get that 4th shot, you've got 33% extra shooting. If you fire from your mixed order formation, you only have the 1 dice, but you get a second dice, so you've now got a 50% increase in your shooting ability. So that first fire really works well for the British. It may even be worth having the skirmish screen out there, using the first fire, so you've got your 2 dice, and then dropping back into the battalion, and then blazing away with your 3 dice from the next turn onwards. Now, as with all of these definitive statements, people will say, well, I did a combined light battalion, and it did this, and that's absolutely fantastic. There are going to be exceptions to this rule, but I would say, as with French not being in column, if you want to detach your light companies from your British battalion, I think you need a really strong reason why. As we mentioned, having that 5th unit in the brigade, that for me is one that's strong enough, but I'll leave that entirely up to you. Now we go to the Grenadiers. Is it worth to have a combined Grenadier battalion? Well, we do know that they were used in history. I've probably told this story before, that at the Battle of Fuentes d'Onoro, this is the second video in a row that's got a shout out to Fuentes d'Onoro. I'm clearly going to have to visit it shortly. But anyway, at the Battle of Fuentes d'Onoro, the Marshal Massena, he massed his Grenadiers together. And, well, yeah, maybe he did. I don't know, it was probably the brigade commander or perhaps the divisional commander did. And he sent the Grenadiers in to clear the village. Now, this is the perfect thing to do with Grenadiers, but unfortunately, they were beaten off by the British. Well, I say unfortunately, not if you're British, it wasn't unfortunate. But these Grenadiers had their 1812 uniforms on, but not the new Shako headgear with the red bands. These boys still wore their bearskins, because why the hell wouldn't you? And having defeated dudes in bearskins, the British were convinced they had defeated the Old Guard. Now, of course they hadn't. The Old Guard were busily gearing up to get massacred in Russia. But that gave a huge morale boost to the Brits. So that's one example of when they were used. And that is really the only time that I would suggest that you use them. And I would use them with another caveat on top of that is, if you've only got line battalions, it's worth having this elite grenadier unit, especially if you are going to attach engineers to it. Again, this is not unreasonable. Lieutenant Legros at the Gate of Hougoumont, he was with the Carabinier Company of the 1st Light Infantry, I think it was, maybe 2nd Light Infantry. But he was with the Carabinier Company there. That is exactly where the engineers will go. In fact, some of my later battalions have the sapper in the Grenadier Company rather than being with the command. So if you're going to do this, you want that elite unit that can be the hammer for the rest of your army. Now, it's important if you're going to do this, particularly if you're French, that you screen them from being shot at. That said, it's not necessarily the end of the world if they do get shot at, because you've got that 1 in 3 chance of them passing their elite roll and no longer being disordered. But you don't really want to rely on that. That's there as a nice backup, but realistically, the best thing to do is just not to get them shot at in the first place. One thing I would very much caution, though, is that you are losing that attack dice from the rest of your brigade, and that's a huge loss for the French. The French like to be in close combat, and if you are nerfing your ability in close combat, I don't know, I don't feel very comfortable doing it. I'm not an all your eggs in one basket kind of player. Some people are, and they can do really, really well with it. Not me, though. It's not how I like to... It's not so much not how I like to play, but it's not how I like to rely on just having that one Death Star unit that's going to carry the day. Now, I think in Black Powder, we're very far from Death Star units. It's not a Witch Elf block with a Cauldron of Blood, but it's that unit that your whole plan hinges on. It goes through. That's why I don't really take tanks in bolt action very often. I don't like to have that single unit that everything relies on. For the British, I can see it's got more... Or it's got less negatives for the British, let's put it that way. You're relying on your shooting anyway. Being one worse in close combat isn't the worst thing in the world, because hopefully you'll have softened up the enemy so much from your shooting that you won't miss that extra dice in close combat. But for me, again, I don't know, man. If you've got that steady line rule, you're counter-charging, you want that dice to be getting on that 3+. For me, I don't like it. I don't. Now, if you are garrisoning a building or a complex, something like Le Haisson or, I don't know, Fuentes d'Onoro or something like that, then I think that's fair enough. I can understand why you would want to detach that unit and have them garrisoning that area. For me, though, it's diluting the power of your army a little bit too much. It's kind of like what's that crazy thing that people do where you like keep boiling it down so there's only 1 microgram of something? It's like a medical thing. I don't know what it's called. Is it homeopathy? Yeah, I think it's homeopathy. Yeah, it's kind of like that. So you're taking what was once something, well, not even that useful in homeopathy, but you're taking something and you're boiling it down and you're putting it in one place, and it's perhaps not got the power that it once did. So now I'm going to get loads of Spanish homeopaths, like, super angry in my comments now, aren't I? For the other nations, for the Austrians and the Russians, obviously take your combined grenadiers. They're either going to be in your points values, which is fair enough, or if you're doing orders of battle, you should probably have them free anyway, unless you're saying, well, the combined grenadiers have been allocated to a different part of the battlefield. That is the problem with the Austrians and the Russian converged grenadiers, is that you either get sort of 4 battalions of them or you get none. It's also worth pointing out that cavalry had flank companies as well, but there's no rules for combined cavalry flank companies, because I think at this scale, the regimental scale, particularly in battle, like, at pitched battle, they'd just be in the line with the rest of the regiment. Although the Raphael Pawlowski, I'm going to horribly mispronounce his name there, apologies, he's done some fantastic skirmishing cavalry recently. I've just downloaded them. The Austrians, I'm looking forward to printing those out. So if you're doing skirmish gaming, if you're doing something like Sharp Practice or Lord of the Sharp, then those are fantastic models for that. And yes, I haven't forgotten about Lord of the Sharp. It is hopefully going to be on its way soon, maybe Christmas, maybe. Also the event pack as well. But that is it for today. I just wanted to have a quick chat about these converged companies, see what your guys' thoughts on them were. Do you like to strip your flank companies from the units to give yourself that powerful reserve, or do you like to dilute it around a little bit and just keep your units at their full strength? Thank you very much for watching, and I'm hoping that as the summer goes on, we can maybe restart Wednesday paint-alongs. Don't hold me to it, but I'm hoping that maybe July, August time we can perhaps get those going, but we'll see. So thank you very much, and I will see you guys next time.